This chapter is on the reproductive system. When we compare the male and female reproductive systems, the first site of comparison is the primary sex organs, which are called gonads. In the female, they will be referred to as ovaries. In the male, they are testes. The other comparison is the sex cells that the gonads produce, referred to as gametes. In the ovaries, they are called oocytes. In the testes, they are referred to as sperm. Both the male testes and the female ovaries are dormant until puberty. The gonads also produce sex hormones, which is responsible for their endocrine function, and this affects maturation, development, and activity of the reproductive organs. For the female reproductive system, the anatomy includes first the primary sex organs, which are the gonads called the ovaries. Also included are the accessory sex organs, which include the uterine tubes, which are oftentimes referred to as the fallopian tubes, the uterus, which is sometimes thought of as the womb, where the embryo and fetus is going to develop, the vagina, clitoris, and the mammary glands. When we look at this sagittal section of the female reproductive organ, we can first see the primary sex organ, which is the gonads, where the oocyte or the egg will develop. Next, closest to the ovary are fimbria, which are sort of wrapping around the ovary, and their purpose is to constantly be in movement, especially to help the released oocyte to be delivered into the uterine tube. The uterine tube then is going to continue down to the uterus, and within the uterus are various layers of tissue. There's an endometrium, a myometrium, and a parametrium. Other important structures include the clitoris, the labium minus and majus, the vaginal orifice leading into the vagina, the cervix at the base of the uterus, and then, of course, the remainder of the uterus. This image is also of the female reproductive system. In this case, though, it's showing in a little more detail the ovary, which are paired oval organs, slightly larger than almonds. So we see one ovary shown over here, and there's a cross-section of this ovary shown here with an enlargement on this part of the slide. So within this ovary, I want you to notice that there is germinal epithelium on the outer region of the ovary, also an outer cortex. And then this is connected to the uterine tube. So in addition to this structure on the slide, also is shown the fimbria, the uterine tube, the uterus, and also the external os, vagina, and cervix at the base of the uterus. So the ovarian follicles lie within the cortex of the ovary, and a follicle is referring to the cells that surround the ovary. So the follicle consists of an oocyte surrounded by follicle cells. There's different stages of development of that ovarian follicle, and each represents a different stage of development. Those follicles begin as primordial follicles, then primary follicles, secondary follicles, and antral follicles. All of these consist or contain primary oocytes. So the stage within development within this ovary are first showing those follicles that were just mentioned, the primordial follicles, which you can see is located in the cortex. The cortex would be the outer general region of the ovary, followed by the primary follicle, secondary follicle, and antral follicle. On the bottom of the ovary, we see a mature follicle, which contains the secondary oocyte. The follicles at the top of the ovary all contain a primary oocyte, and the primary oocyte is unique because it is still what we refer to as diploid. And this means that it has a full complement of chromosomes, which is 46. It's only after the first part of oogenesis where the secondary oocyte is haploid. It has the 23 chromosomes that are going to contribute to fertilization. So notice again that the center of the ovary is the medulla, and the outer part of the cortex is where germinal epithelium is located at. So after ovulation would be these stages. The ovulated oocyte is going to contain some membranes around it called the zona pellucida and the corona radiata. Remaining in the ovary after there's tissue that remains in it, which is going to be responsible for supporting that embryo. And that's called the corpus luteum. If, however, pregnancy does not occur and there's no embryo to support, that corpus luteum will degenerate to be called the corpus albicans. So the ovarian follicles have distinct stages of development, and they are the primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, antral follicle, mature or Graafian follicle. And then after ovulation, the corpus luteum, and then corpus albicans if no pregnancy occurs. Because the main function of the corpus luteum is to support the embryo by producing primarily progesterone as well as some estrogens. So this slide is showing the histology of a mature follicle. And the mature follicle is what's going to contain the secondary oocyte, which again is what's ovulated, and it is haploid, which means it has 23 chromosomes. One thing that is distinct of this is a large antrum, which is actually what is shown on these images here. And where I've drawn the arrow is actually the antrum, and it's showing a mature follicle. So we also see a mature follicle on this image. So be sure that you can identify something like this on a quiz or an exam. Surrounding that secondary oocyte is a couple membranes, and one of which is the zona pellucida, and then also the corona radiata.